All right, welcome to one of your first experience with some video notes in our Algebra 2 class. What I did was I took a screenshot of the domain and range first page. So copy it down at your own pace. I'll just talk through it. If you need to pause to get everything down, make sure you do that. We already talked about the fact that domain is a set of all x values. And we're just going to look at some different notation here. So we have inequality notation, which includes the less than or equal to and the less than. Less than or equal to includes the value, less than does not include the value. And that will make sense when we look at the different examples. And then we have three options. The first one is a kind of a sandwich inequality. You could also use less than or equal to in that format or just less than, and you do left to right. So the key here is that we're going the furthest left we can go and the furthest right we can go. We're doing that the same thing with our other notation, which will be a brand new one. And then the other option is doing just x is greater than something to the furthest to the left, or x is less than furthest to the right. And you'll see what you're comfortable with when we first start this. Interval notation, if you don't include the endpoints, and we can mix and match this, which is said down here, you're just going to put furthest left, comma, furthest right. So the difference, you're not putting the x in, so you have to make sure you use x for domain. And if you're going to include the end values, meaning the graph goes through that, you're using brackets. So you see how it's important to, when we're using points, use those squiggly brackets. When we're here, parentheses versus the square brackets make a difference in what it means. Again, we're going from left to right. Then we get into the range. The range is our set of all y values. So I'm going to slide this down. Again, if you need to pause to make sure you get all that information in there, make sure you do that. And it's pretty much the same setup, except we're now going lowest to highest. So how low does the graph go? How high does the graph go? And again, we can mix and match the less than or equal to's and the less than signs. But same idea. If you're using inequality notation, you have to identify that it's y that you're working with for the range. Or you could do greater than the lowest or less than the highest. And then interval notation is the same thing. Again, just swapping out left to right with lowest to highest. Parentheses if we're not including the value, and then brackets if the end values are included. Again, there can be mixtures, like you could have a parentheses and a bracket in the same answer. And then probably won't take a look at this within the videos. This is something we'll definitely do together, but the union is for graphs that have pieces. I take that back. We're going to do it with the first set of questions, and then we're going to save the two-dimensional graphs union aspect for a separate time. All right, so make sure you get all of that copied. We're going to refer back to this notation page, and this is just a blank of that. We're going to get right into some of the good examples. So I'm going to get through this first page of examples before stopping this video, giving you a chance to digest that. And then we'll take a look at some of the two-dimensional graphs, the XY coordinate plane. So our first set, we are doing domain only. So we're only doing x's here because it's only an x-axis, but it's a good place to start with the number lines. One thing to notice is there is an arrow here that technically keeps this going on forever in the direction to the right. And a filled in circle means that we are including the value. So we have a filled in circle at 1. Apparently I don't know how to spell value. There we go. So filled in circle at 1. 1 is furthest to the left. So you want to look at the graph. Here's your left, here's your right. This is the furthest left that we're going, and then the furthest right is the fact that I keep going. So I'm going to start with inequality and go back to interval, because inequality is probably something that you're familiar with. We're starting with 1. Because it's included, we're going to use less than or equal to x. And then since it goes on forever to the right, we're going to put this symbol of infinity, which hopefully you've seen before, but if this is the first time, that's the infinity symbol. And infinity always gets a less than or a parentheses. And then interval notation is very similar. We just get rid of the x, including the 1 because of the filled in circle means a bracket. And then we put comma infinity with a parentheses because you can't reach infinity. It's just an idea of going on forever and ever. So next one, I'll start with the interval. And we want to think about, okay, here's left, here's right. This is my way of kind of pointing that out without being able to show it to you visually. And then you want to think, how far left does this graph go? That has to be your first number. It is going in the negative direction forever. So it's going to negative infinity. And then the furthest right that it goes is here at -3. Now this open circle means don't include the value. And there are different ways you'll see that when we get to the XY coordinate plane graphs as well. So since I'm not including it, that's where I'm putting the parentheses next to the number. And then for inequality notation, I can do the same thing. Negative infinity is less than x, because it's a domain, is less than -3. So one thing to definitely notice, and I can try to color code this also, a parentheses matches up with a less than sign that doesn't have the equal to piece. And the bracket, I don't know if this is going to look different if I change this to orange, and the less than or equal to sign match up with each other. So just noticing the connection between those different notations is definitely helpful. Now there is an alternative way to write the inequality notation. I could have written this as x is greater than or equal to 1. And the other one I could have written as x is less than -3. And that actually might seem kind of familiar when you're looking at these number line graphs, because if you work with number lines, that's the way you would write it. It's a little harder to see when we add that extra dimension, that y-axis, in later on. So you see what you're comfortable with, but you might want to stick with what I have as my first option there. All right, the next one, we have the two pieces coming in. So with pieces, we're either going to use the union symbol or the word or to connect it. The first piece is here. I actually put brackets on. We're doing the interval notation. So the furthest left that piece goes is -8. And the furthest right is -4. But there's a second piece. So with interval notation, we're going to put the union symbol as our connector. And then we're starting again with this new piece, starts at 2, and the arrow continues to the right going to infinity. So we'll put 2, infinity with a parentheses. If you're comfortable setting up that notation, all you have to now do is translate that over to inequality and put less than or equal to signs, making sure to continue to put x here. And the only difference with the connector is that in an inequality, you would use the word or as your connector. All right, and we have one more example like that, again with two pieces, just focusing in again on the left to right. So the furthest left that this first piece goes is -infinity. And then the furthest right that the piece goes is -5. And then the second piece, notice the open circle, starts at -4. Oh, sorry, +4. But because of the open circle, you want to put a parentheses. And then it stops, so I'm going to put a parentheses here and a bracket here instead, just because I want you to realize the open circle means that we want the parentheses, and then it does stop at 10. It looks like there is no arrow there. It definitely is a dot that's stopping at 10, so we will put a bracket. And then we're going to do the same thing over here. Negative infinity, less than x, less than or equal to -5. Connect it with the word or, and then 4 is less than x is less than or equal to 10. Alternative to this one, you could write x is less than or equal to -5 without having the negative infinity in the front. It is a little less writing, but if you are understanding the basics and trying to get used to the parentheses and the brackets and how that matches up with the inequality, the first option that I'm showing for each of these, the interval and inequality match up perfectly. And then you can see, okay, this is parentheses here, that matches up with less than signs. Those go together. And then I have brackets here, and that matches up with my less than or equal to signs. All right, and the last piece is reviewing the vertical line test before we get into the domain and range of graphs that look like this. So first one is our circle. Just to remind you, if it hits 2 or more points, it's not a function. So if I draw a vertical line here on the circle, I see it hits 2 points, that would be no. Any place I draw a vertical line here, if I draw one here, or if I draw one over here, it only hits one time, no matter where I pick. So this one would be yes, it's a function. So we're going to take a pause. In our second video, we'll look at some of these types of graphs and how to do the domain and range for those.